So this is Module 2 of PSAT 2, and as always you can use the timestamps below to skip ahead to whichever question or questions you are interested in, but we'll go ahead and get started here with number 1. And it says, the way in which individual elements are balanced within a photographic image tends to affect how viewers perceive it. Symmetry tends to give the elements equal importance. Asymmetry emphasizes differences, and radial balance emphasizes the center over the periphery. What a photograph conveys is therefore largely blank how it is balanced. And so the word therefore tells us that we have a conclusion or a kind of cause and effect relationship. And so what it conveys or emphasizes is therefore largely dependent on how it is balanced. And so we could also say affected by. But our correct answer here is going to be B. And so contingent on basically means dependent on. Like if you have a contingency plan, that's like having a backup plan, a plan B. Now, if I were to say, let's say that I were looking after an older relative, I wouldn't say that my, grandmother is contingent on me. That wouldn't work. But we could say something like, our plans for the picnic are contingent on the weather. If it rains, we'll have to move the picnic, or something like that. Inhibited by means that something else gets in the way of it. Obligated to, if you're obligated to do something, you're kind of required to do it. You have to do it. And reserved for, that wouldn't make much sense here. Number 2, cuttlefish appear to be surprisingly blank at exercising self-control. So they're going to describe how they are at exercising self-control. So maybe we'll find that they're good at it or not good at it. But as it says here, this study found that they demonstrated restraint by delaying gratification, waiting for a favorite treat instead of instantly devouring a readily available meal. So that means they're surprisingly good. Good. So not awkward. Now, imaginative could mean good, but it doesn't make sense here to talk about imaginative. Manageable, that doesn't make a lot of sense either, but competent. So if you're competent at something, you have ability to do it. You're good at doing it. You're skilled, or at least you're able, you're capable. So number 3, economists often assert that countries looking to increase their reliance on solar energy should expand their capacity for storage. Having an ample reserve of stored energy can mitigate or lessen the effects of blank, blank, blank solar energy collection caused by unpredictable shifts in cloud cover and haze. Okay, so I'm just going to say something like ups and downs in. Why ups and downs? Because if you have shifts in cloud cover and haze, well, you're going to have times of day when sunlight is going to be able to get through, and other times when that sunlight is blocked. And so our correct answer here is going to be fluctuations. Fluctuations in. A fluctuation is that kind of up and down movement. So developments of doesn't really make much sense here. Calibrations, if you calibrate something, like that's like calibrating a tool. Like you might calibrate a scale or calibrate, some other measurement tool to basically make sure that it's accurate. Make sure that it's not giving you systematically inaccurate measurements. And then an incentive would be, an incentive for if people were somehow paid money to collect solar energy, there would be an incentive for them to do so. But our answer here will be B, fluctuations. Number 4, as discussed by this scholar, many artworks produced in the mid-1990s to early 2000s exclusively for exhibition on the internet have become inaccessible because viewing them requires the use of blank software. And so here they're telling us very explicitly, I think, that we are talking about discontinued software. Software that is, let's pretend that letter looks like a cross between an N and a U. Discontinued, obsolete, defunct. Defunct means not functioning, no longer functioning. Arcane would refer to something that is, like specialized or kind of esoteric, like arcane knowledge. Ubiquitous. Well, if the software were ubiquitous, it wouldn't be very hard to view these things because the software would be everywhere. And then extraneous means like not necessary, superfluous, not needed. The overall structure of the text. And so here, whether it's a poem or regular old paragraph, with the structure questions, I always like to think of going from something to something, because there's only so much structure you can generally have with these kinds of, short passages. And so we have this poem about called Marshlands. So among the wild rice in the still lagoon, in a monotone, the lizard shrills his tune. So shrills, I've never heard that as a verb, but as an adjective, shrill means like a shrieking, harsh sound. So we have a lizard out in a lagoon. The wild goose seeks a sheltering where rushes grow, oozing lichens cling, some kind of mossy something or other. Late cranes, and these are cranes as in birds, with heavy wing and lazy flight, sail up the silence with nearing night. So I'm just going to say it's describing the lagoon and the wildlife that inhabits it. I don't know if we're going to see a shift. Maybe we won't see a shift, from this to that. But so far it's been describing this wildlife. So sail up the silence with nearing night, and like a spirit swathed in some soft veil. So swathed would be like covered. The night steals twilight and its shadows over the swale. Not sure what a swale is, but it's probably some aspect of this physical, landscape, the lagoon. Hushed lie the sedges and the vapors creep, thick, gray, and humid while the marshes sleep. I mean, it seems like, we have nighttime coming, shadows, twilight, hushing, so, to kind of a night and then sleep. So it's describing, activity, but basically, nighttime, I don't know, descends. I don't know, this is pretty rough here. But it's describing the marshlands as nighttime approaches. So no. I mean, it does name these things, but that's not a shift. It sketches a setting by presenting a series of images of nature. It definitely doesn't make an extended comparison of nature to human emotions, and then it doesn't refer to a person living there. Yeah, so didn't really see the usual sort of, again, from this to that. It's really just kind of continuous. But, hey, at least we were able to get it right by just paying attention to what it's doing. And notice here that, there were words in here that I didn't know. I'm a native English speaker. I know a lot of you all are not first language, native English speakers. You're not going to know all these words, but you don't have to know every single word to be able to get these poetry questions right. That's really the big takeaway that I would try to emphasize. Don't be intimidated if you don't know every single word. Chances are you don't need to know every single word. So the underlined sentence. So we want to pay attention to this information, but also, each sentence as we go, pay attention to how they connect to each other. So it's an autobiographical novel, a young girl living in Pittsburgh. So I walked. My mother had given me the freedom of the streets. As soon as I could say our telephone number, I walked and memorized the neighborhood. I made a mental map and located myself upon it. At night in bed, I rehearsed the small world's scheme and set challenges. So I did two things: rehearse the small world's scheme and set or created challenges. Find the store using backyards only. Imagine a route from the school to my friend's house. Okay, so examples of challenges that she set for herself. Challenges in terms of, navigating the neighborhood. So she's not trying to memorize her telephone number. Examples of what the narrator thinks about at night. Maybe. Examples, yes. And then at night, well, what does she think about at night? These challenges that she set for herself. So even though it doesn't initially look like a match, that is going to be correct. Why not C? It says find a store, but it doesn't say it's her favorite local store. So you never want to go beyond what you have evidence for in the passage. And, just because it's a store doesn't mean it's her favorite. And then, no, the relationship with her mother is mentioned early in the passage, but not in the underlined sentence. What does the text suggest about the Turkins? So the following text is from Anton Chekhov's 1898 story, Ionich. The text is set in a Russian city referred to as the city of S. If newcomers to the little provincial city of S complained that life there was monotonous and dull, its inhabitants would answer that, on the contrary, S was a very amusing place. Indeed, that it had a library and a club, that balls were given there like parties, and finally that very pleasant families lived there with whom one might become acquainted. And they always pointed to the Turkins. Okay, what is true about the Turkins? They are the most accomplished and enlightened family of all, according to inhabitants of S. So it doesn't mean they are literally the most accomplished and enlightened family in the entire world, just that they were thought of that way by the residents of this city. So no, they are not relative newcomers. They have a unique status. Nothing about them disliking it, and nothing about their being amused. And so unique is a word that I would say it's a strong word, meaning you need equally strong evidence to support it. But we have that here. The most accomplished and most enlightened family, well, that's enough to grant them a unique status. And so our answer will be B. What does the text most strongly suggest about the songs sung by Rainey and Smith? So here I'll note that this means we need to make an inference, even though this question type is not going to fall into the inference category. This would fall in the central ideas and details subcategory. Central ideas and details, but strongly suggests that wording means that we need to find something that is, not directly stated, but something that we can infer. Okay, so in her 1998 book, Such and Such, Angela Davis bases her analysis in part on recordings of songs sung in the 1920s by these two people. She focuses on how they improvised the lyrics, replacing the original lines with mischievous jokes and wordplay. Her work was particularly labor-intensive. It took a lot of labor, because in order to transcribe or write down the lyrics as these two women sang them, she had to listen repeatedly to the vinyl recordings, which weren't very clear. Well, if she had to transcribe them, she had to listen repeatedly to the vinyl recordings. That would imply that the lyrics weren't written down. And that's also supported by the fact that they were improvising them. So if they were improvising them, they weren't previously written down. So there's nothing about popularity. There's nothing that contrasts the one to the other in terms of how many recordings there are. C, there were few, if any, reliable transcriptions when she began her research. It's not about how musically innovative they were. And we're not contrasting Rainey and Smith. They're grouped together. And so, yes. So this is a good example of what it means to infer something. It's not directly stated, but putting two and two together, if she had to transcribe them, and by listening repeatedly to the recordings, well, they hadn't already been transcribed. because if they had already been transcribed, she would just use those transcriptions and not listen to these scratchy old records. So main idea, we will read it and try to summarize it in 3 to 5 words. So Karenin is a dog that belongs to these two people. So Karenin was not overjoyed by the move to Switzerland. The dog hated change. Dog time cannot be plotted along a straight line. It does not move on and on from one thing to the next. It moves in a circle, like the hands of a clock, which turn round and round the face, day in and day out, following the same path. In Prague, when the two people bought a new chair or moved a flower pot, Karenin would look on in displeasure. It disturbed his sense of time. It was as though they were trying to dupe the hands of the clock by changing the number on its face. So, does not like change. The dog does not like change. A sense of time involves a strong preference for predictability and an aversion to or dislike of disruption. Does not like change, has an aversion to disruption. So we don't see anything about the negative response becoming more pronounced. It doesn't say that they are similar. In fact, it contrasts the dog from the humans, or the dog with the humans. And it doesn't say anything about accelerating. So the answer there will be A. Something that would strengthen the underlined explanation. So gorgets, or necklaces with large pendants, have become part of the ceremonial attire of tribes from the U.S. Southeast for centuries. One of the oldest examples was found in Fairfield, Missouri in 1958. Its overall design resembles that of other art from the region during the Mississippian period, yet the image on the gorget is of a jaguar, a species whose range doesn't extend to Missouri. Jaguar images are common in ancient Mexican art, and Mexico lies squarely in the species range. Therefore, some scholars argue that long-distance trade in Mexican art objects, so Mexico and Missouri, so trade in Mexican art objects brought the imagery to Missouri, where a local artist could have adopted it and incorporated it into the Fairfield gorget. So we have jaguars down here, no jaguars up here, and they're not saying that jaguars were imported, but rather that an image of a jaguar was imported. So something that would support that. And really it has to do with, location. Location is going to be an important thing here. So, A is talking just about time, and that's not the issue. If anything, that would... it's just not relevant. It's not relevant. A is not relevant. The range of the jaguar is shown to have expanded dramatically after that period came to a close. That's not going to be relevant because we're talking about something that was created during that period. An ancient Mexican art object is found at a site that dates to this period and is close to where... Okay, well this would actually give some evidence, because if you had an ancient Mexican art object that is from the correct period and is found close to where this was found, that would be evidence that there was, or there had been, long-distance trade in Mexican art objects. We would have an example of Mexican art objects being transported as part of trade between these two regions. And so I think C is going to be correct. That is not relevant either. So I don't have any great words of wisdom on this one. I definitely have videos talking about strengthen and weaken questions, but sometimes it's just a matter of focusing on, what the variables or factors are that are going to be involved in strengthening the argument. And again, in this case, it really has to do with the location. Trade from Mexico to Missouri. Okay, data from the graph to complete the text. So we want to focus on this part, the passage first, use that as a guide in terms of what we want to pick out from the graph. So participative pricing, in which purchasers choose the price they pay for products, can enable sellers to capitalize on the heterogeneous or varied values that customers assign to the same goods and services. But doing so requires careful messaging. Researchers recruited 171 participants online for an initial study and 83 students at a state university for a second study to test the effect of 3 different messages. Okay, so we have 2 different studies. One involving people in that age range and another one involving ones in that age range. And then we have 3 different statements. Pay what you can, pay what you think it's worth, and pay what you want. And the study involved how much participants would pay for concert tickets. Their results illustrate both the heterogeneity or diversity of consumer valuations and how sellers can benefit by prompting consumers to consider their own valuations. Okay, and looking at this part here, pay what you want. Let's see, consider their own valuations. I think considering means thinking, and valuations means worth. So I think we really want to focus on how sellers would benefit, meaning that people would pay more when they pay what they think it's worth. And that does stand out here. What they think it's worth, considering their own valuation. So in both studies, the pay what you think it's worth category, paid the most. So, I mean, there's going to be another part of it, the heterogeneity of consumer valuations, but I want to first look for something that emphasizes that point. Okay. It's not about paying the closest to the actual cost. It's not about students versus the other group. Students tended to value the concert tickets more highly than did the more age-diverse group, but both groups tended to choose a higher price when considering the value of the tickets than when considering what they could afford. Okay, considering the value of the tickets. Both groups tended to choose a higher price when considering the value of the tickets. So I did not mean to cross that out. I meant to underline it. That's correct. Is it true that the students tended to value the concert tickets more highly? Study 2 is the students. Yes. Yes. So I think C is correct, but let's check D. Yeah, it has to say something about the pay what you think it's worth being, more, that they paid more, because that's going to benefit the sellers. They're going to get more money. So 11 should be C. Which statement would most strongly support the claim made by these people about the cause of, I'm just going to say, O's acceleration? So initially observed here, the interstellar object O is the first object of its kind to be seen in our solar system. Researchers have been puzzled because its acceleration cannot be entirely explained by the gravitational pull of nearby bodies. There must be a non-gravitational influence on its velocity and trajectory. Okay, we're looking for an explanation of its acceleration. Okay, they've been puzzled because its acceleration cannot be explained entirely by the gravitational pull of nearby bodies. There must be a non-gravitational influence on its velocity and trajectory. Some previously suggested explanations for this non-gravitational acceleration involve mechanisms that are unlikely or unrealistic, such as geometric effects from its being potentially composed of several spatially separated bodies. Now, this person and colleagues propose that, so non-gravitational acceleration is due to the gaseous expulsion of entrapped hydrogen. Okay. Well, It's that is in contrast to previously suggested explanations that are unlikely or unrealistic. And yes, which of the following would support the claim? And we just have to go through the answers here because I can't think of, anything. It could be something that supports this. It could be something that weakens alternative explanations. Existing proposed models of outgassing include the direct conversion. These are very long answer choices. So when you have really long answer choices, I think it becomes that much more important to really focus on, what we're looking for, because that is more text than that. So we could really end up wasting a lot of time. So let's refocus here. Due to the gaseous expulsion of, I'm going to say, here is its water-rich, icy body, so H2O ice, as opposed to other liquid, as opposed to ice from other substances. And then we have hydrogen being expelled. Okay. Something involving hydrogen. And okay, so existing proposed models of outgassing include the direct conversion of nitrogen or carbon monoxide from a solid to a gaseous state without becoming liquid. That wouldn't support. Well, it doesn't really support their claim. B, its trajectory is inconsistent with a non-gravitational acceleration that would be caused by the release of hydrogen gas resulting from the processing of water ice. I think this would weaken it. The release of hydrogen gas from the processing of water ice, because that's what they're saying. I think B would weaken it. Since non-gravitational accelerations of interstellar objects are several orders of magnitude weaker than gravitational accelerations, deviation from behavior that could be fully attributed to gravitational pull has been detected. That's not relevant. We're talking about this object, not objects similar to it. Exposure to interstellar cosmic radiation can result in the formation of embedded pockets of hydrogen gas in water ice. Hydrogen gas in water ice. Moreover, when traveling through the solar system, it experienced warming sufficient to alter its icy structure and allow for outgassing. So outgassing, I think, is the same thing as gaseous expulsion. I'm surprised that they expect us to know what outgassing means, but just kind of putting it together, gas being driven out. Does it? Well, it says here it experienced warming sufficient to alter its icy structure and allow for outgassing, and they're saying that gas was expelled, so it's going to have to be D. Okay, so a tougher question there. But again, words of wisdom, I don't know, other than just try to get as clear as possible on the passage before diving into the answer choices when you have those long, complicated answer choices. Logically completing the text, so we just want to focus on the line of reasoning here. A main goal of the AACM is to advance new works by black musicians. The AACM achieves this goal in part by focusing on young artists. By having established musicians and composers serve as mentors, the AACM gives young artists the benefits of expert technical training and creative guidance. Numerous organizations offer similar kinds of support to new generations, suggesting that the AACM is not unique. It's not unique in this regard. It is one of several organizations that does this, maybe suggesting that other organizations also realize the importance of focusing on younger artists. So it's not comparing technical training to creative guidance. It's saying that they're both, good things to get. Many arts organizations recognize the importance of providing opportunities for young artists. Yes, this one is not unique in this regard because others also do it. It doesn't say anything about artists becoming even better artists. And it doesn't say that it's more important for musicians than it is for other types of artists. So again, I can't think of any great words of wisdom here other than reading carefully and trying to follow the line of reasoning as we go. Another logically completing the text question. This researcher analyzed the genomes of more than 100 domesticated dogs from sites in Siberia dating from 11,000 years ago to the present. So maybe there's a timeline aspect here. So 11,000 years ago. Okay, they found that dogs constituted a genetically isolated population of Arctic breeds until around 2,000 years ago, at which point there was substantial interbreeding with Near Eastern dog breeds. Okay, so genetically isolated, and then we have interbreeding. Furthermore, beginning around 2,000 years ago, some sites contain artifacts consistent with a Near East origin, like glass beads, but the people show no evidence of having traveled extensively outside of Siberia. From this, they concluded that around 2,000 years ago, people came to the area from the Near East. Right? Because that would explain two things. It would explain how the Near Eastern dog breeds made it over there, and also how these artifacts made it over there. It's not as if the people from Siberia went to the Near East and brought things back with them. People must have come from the outside. Dogs and artifacts like glass beads began to be transported? Possibly. Definitely not B, because B would contradict what's in the passage, and we never want to contradict what's in the passage. There's no evidence that they've traveled, so we don't want to conclude that they have traveled. C, glass beads. No, they don't say anything about exchanging those things for dogs, because that wouldn't explain how dogs from the Near East had started to interbreed with the dogs that had previously been there. Dogs from the Near East began to be exchanged for glass beads and other artifacts. I mean, it's pretty similar, but I guess it's just the opposite. Yeah. So, but the reason I didn't initially pick A was I wasn't sure if there was going to be maybe some other thing. I mean, they began to be transported. I thought it just mean that people brought these things over, but I guess you could say if people brought these things over, they were transporting these things. But in any event, that would be A. But yeah, the timeline, when there's a timeline involved, I think it really helps to sketch out the timeline. And of course, you can't do it on the screen during the test, but you will have scrap paper, and I think it is worth doing that. Okay, so on to the standard English conventions questions. And the first thing I note here is that we've got one with a period, a couple with commas, and one without punctuation. So the first thing we want to do here is focus on figuring out, how many independent clauses are there in the sentence with the blank? So the sentence with the blank is going to start with the word before. Before the park's construction, the surface temperature outside the park was cooler than that of a control area, and then after construction, the temperature was this much cooler. So that means we have two independent clauses. And because we have two independent clauses and we don't have any options that give us a comma together with a conjunction, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, a coordinating conjunction, I should say, the answer is going to have to be C. That's the only way we can join two independent clauses in this case without, creating a run-on sentence. And so C is our answer. Here, just possibly extra unnecessary punctuation. Let's see. These temporary supports, a construction system known as false work. No, it's not unnecessary punctuation. It is punctuating an interruption, meaning, a portion of the sentence that we could also call it an appositive that supplies extra information but isn't absolutely necessary. These temporary supports were removed when the bridge was completed. So since it starts with a comma, it needs to end with a comma. There was a similar question on Module 1, but the interruption started with a dash, or ended with a dash, and so it needed to start with a dash. But you always want to match up the punctuation on those kind of questions. This one is going to be subject-verb agreement, and the reason I can see that is that 3 of these are plural, and 1 of them is singular. Usually, when that's the case, the one that's not like the others is going to be correct, but in any event, it tells us that it's primarily going to be a subject-verb agreement question. So, in this short story efficiency, an artificial intelligence powers Chicago's energy grid. And so how could we just verify that that is the correct subject? This portion here can be ignored because that is an appositive or interruption. So we can also ignore that part because that's just an introductory phrase. So an artificial intelligence, and then finally we have this. I think we would call that a relative clause. That clause. So an artificial intelligence powers Chicago's energy grid, and so it will be C. But 90% of the time or more, you can get these right simply by picking the odd one out on these questions, these subject-verb agreement questions. Here we have another one that looks kind of like number 15 in that we've got a mix of what I'd call hard and soft punctuation. Hard meaning period, semicolon, or colon. Soft meaning either a comma or nothing. So we want to pay attention to how many independent clauses we have in the portion with the blank. So in modern plays, actors typically won't acknowledge the audience. So that is definitely an independent clause. And then to do so breaks the fourth wall. That's a second independent clause. And then what comes after it, that's a long appositive, a metaphorical barrier between actors and audiences that allows viewers to suspend the knowledge that they're watching a stage performance. So we don't need to worry about that part. But we have 2 independent clauses. That means we can get rid of the ones that don't have any, hard punctuation. And now the difference between A and C is that A creates another problem. A gives us a period, but then the portion after the period would be a fragment. As to do so breaks the fourth wall. C is going to be correct. That is a little bit tricky. To do so. That really is our subject. Breaks is the verb. And that is an unusual case, but we could think about it this way. To do so is very similar to doing so. And you might recognize that an ing word like doing, we could call that a gerund, not that it matters what we call it, but that's when you have an ing word that acts as a subject. So if I were to say walking is good exercise, well, our subject here is walking. And we could also say to walk. I mean, it's a little awkward to walk. To walk is good exercise. I mean, that's essentially what's happening is this, it's a little, we could say more about this, but that's our subject in the red portion. And so we do have multiple independent clauses, so our answer choice would be C. Here's another one that's going to be another boundaries question. So we've got one hard punctuation mark, a couple with no punctuation. So let's pay attention once again to our sentence structure here. Okay, looks like we just have one sentence. I mean, we have no periods in here except at the very end. So, Butterfly is a 1988 painting by this artist. Oh, never mind. That's a period. Okay, so we're going to cross that out. Like many of this artist's paintings, Okay, I'm going to cross that out because that is just an introductory portion. Butterfly, which portrays a swimmer performing the butterfly stroke. We're going to ignore that because that's in a positive. Butterfly attempts to make use of the entire visual light spectrum. So that is an independent clause, up to and including spectrum. And then sporting rainbow-striped goggles, the rainbow-hued swimmer splashes through a wavy rainbow of water. So we have two independent clauses. So we definitely need some punctuation. Now, you might say, what about C and D? Because while is a subordinating clause, which would technically turn the later portion of the sentence or some later portion of the sentence into a dependent clause. Specifically, it would turn this portion into a dependent clause. But the problem with picking either C or D is that we still eventually have a second independent clause. And so, this would not be considered acceptable. If you have an independent clause, a dependent clause, and then another independent clause. Or even if you have, an independent clause, a dependent clause without a comma, and then another independent clause. Regardless of what's in between them, if you have multiple independent clauses, the only way you can join them without using something like a period, semicolon, or colon would be if you had a comma and a conjunction. Specifically, a coordinating conjunction, a fanboys conjunction, for and nor but or yet so. So some might get caught up in the distinction of, between C and D, do you need a comma before while or not? And the answer is it depends. And I have a video about that, and I'll try to remember to link to it. But in this case, that distinction isn't important. The important thing here is that we need some kind of harder punctuation. And so while it is not okay to do either of these things, this is okay. You have multiple independent clauses. You can join them with a colon, and this is a pattern that has actually shown up several times, on multiple tests. And so our correct answer there would be B. Another one that is kind of in the same category. So once again, going to pay attention to the number of independent clauses. So the limon technique, I'm going to cross that out, is known for its emphasis on breath control and its interplay of weight and weightlessness. Dancers may explore, for example, the moment of midair suspension at the top of a jump. And we can even simplify it a little bit more by taking out these prepositional phrases of a jump, at the top, of midair suspension. Okay, but anyway, the important thing here is we're going to have two independent clauses. One of them is here. This technique is known for its emphasis on breath control and its interplay of weight and weightlessness. And then dancers may explore the moment. Dancers may explore the moment of midair suspension at the top of a jump. So we have two independent clauses. That means we need some punctuation, and that punctuation needs to be stronger than a comma, so it's going to have to be D. It could have also had a period or even a colon there, but we needed something, again, hard as opposed to soft or non-existent. On to the transition words. So in 1942, this highway was constructed in under 9 months, largely due to the skilled work of all of these soldiers from the U.S. engineering regiments. The soldiers' contribution was overlooked for decades. Blank. They declared this as a day of recognition. So this is it's either going to be a contrast or something like eventually, because it took a long time for their contribution to be recognized. So it was overlooked. It was finally recognized. So It's not going to be similarly, and it's not going to be for example. Lastly versus then. I would not say lastly here. I imagine that would be a fairly tempting choice, and it is tempting, but we don't really have a sequence. We don't say, it's not saying first, then, next, lastly. It's basically saying it was overlooked, then then they were recognized. Their contribution was overlooked, then it was recognized. So I would have preferred something like eventually or ultimately, but that is going to be the one that indicates a sequence. Again, the A could indicate a sequence, but really the transition here has to do with these two sentences. It's not really a continuation of a long series of events. So it would be B. Observing the fire, that a fire in a closed container soon went out, leading 18th century scientists did not conclude that fresh air is necessary for combustion. Instead, many theorized that the container's air had become saturated with a substance called phlogiston. Blank, when Joseph Priestley first isolated oxygen, he termed it dephlogisticated air. So this is cause and effect. It's because of the fact that they thought it was saturated with phlogiston that he called this thing dephlogisticated air. He thought this stuff had been removed from it. So therefore, or for this reason. And then on to the, wow, that's a lot of rhetorical synthesis questions. But what I emphasize here, we want to focus first on the function words in our answer choices, but we don't want to just pick the first one that seems like it might work, because we also have to be aware of accuracy. That's kind of a new twist that they've started incorporating in these questions on the more recently released tests. So, how scientific understanding about the glass's origin has evolved. So A doesn't say anything about how it has evolved. It's just saying that one study concluded this, but that doesn't say anything about how that understanding has changed over time. Neither does that. Neither does that. So yeah, this is the only one that talks about how it has evolved over time. And since it is the only one that does that, we don't have to look and verify it. I mean, we could if we wanted, if you have the luxury of time, but time is important, efficiency is important, so we only want to do that if it's necessary. Okay, so begin a narrative about the creation of the robots. So A doesn't seem like it would begin something. That's already getting into details. That is also not the beginning. Inspired by ants, this person set out to design this. If you set out to do something, you started it. And so if they're describing this process of creation, we want to give something that, talks about how this started out. What was it inspired by? What was the goal? And so it's going to have to be C. So far, two of them that we can get without looking at the bullet points. A difference in how katydids and crab spiders use mimicry. I mean, A looks okay. There's no difference in B. Okay, and I think it's actually going to be C, because how they use mimicry. How they do it. And so crab spiders use mimicry to ambush their prey. They use it. And actually, this is pretty tricky now that I think about it, because how they use it. Is that the same thing as for what purpose do they use it? If somebody were to ask me, how do I annotate on the screen? I use this app called OpenBoard. I don't have an endorsement deal with them, but how do I do it? So I use this app. How do katydids use mimicry? I mean, I don't think that's a big difference. They both mimic the appearance of plant matter, but I think the bigger difference is, what they use it for. I'll have to check the answer on this, but I would go with C. That's tricky. How they use mimicry. I mean, they use it. I think C is going to be correct there. 26. Describe the exhibition curated in 2018. And here I'm going to glance at the bullet points because there are multiple ones, so it needs to be that one. 7 emerging Latino artists. Okay. So, like, with A, we can eliminate that one because it's referring to the wrong one. B looks good. C doesn't mention anything specific, and that doesn't either. Yeah, so there's one where we needed the bullet points. And then finally, 27, use one of the poems to illustrate the sestina form. And here I'd say we do need the bullet points. A sestina is a 39-line poetic form. 39 lines. Each line of the poem ends with one of 6 end words, which alternate. Okay. Hacker employs the sestina. So A doesn't illustrate it. It just says that she uses it. As a sestina, this one contains 39 lines and 6 end words that alternate in a set pattern. Maybe. C, the 39-line sestina form uses the words daughter. C is not accurate. It's not true that in general it uses these words. It uses certain end words, but it doesn't necessarily use those words. Has used it multiple times, as in towards autumn, which contains these 6 words, but it doesn't identify those as end words. I don't think it just contains those 6 words. I think it's saying that lines have to end with one of these 6 words. So it would need to be B. Any questions or comments, ones that you'd like me to go into more detail on, please leave those in the comments below and I'll do my best. Otherwise, I hope this was helpful. Feel free to look around elsewhere on this channel for many, many other videos on the SAT and PSAT reading and writing section, as well as some videos on the math section as well.